Good morning, everyone. If we could all find our seats. I'd like to welcome you all this morning on this very cold, cloudy, and windy Sunday morning. Welcome to Houston Oasis. My name is Jacob. I'll be your MC today. We have a great program lined up for you. We have our musician, Mariana Sokol. She's a board-certified therapist whose music has been featured on MTV, NPR, KPFT, and elsewhere. We have a community moment entitled Interfaith Adventures, presented by our own Paige Williams, Wil Jeudy, and David Oliverio. And our main talk today will be from Brian Phillips. And his talk will be a new framework for housing policy.
Nice. All right, so we're moving on to the main talk now. And that is Brian Phillips, who's going to give a talk entitled A New Framework for Housing Policy. And we're going to present his vision for a new framework for housing policy. So Brian, come up here, please.
So how many people here are renters? Okay, and how many of you would like to own your own home someday? Okay, small number. Today, hopefully what I say today will give you some understanding of why that might be difficult to achieve. Is this? Okay, all right, sure. There's almost nobody in the country, at least nobody who's alive in the country, who thinks that America does not have an affordable housing crisis. It's widely recognized. The National Low-Income Housing Coalition estimates that the country needs more than 7 million houses that are affordable for low and moderate income households. And by affordable, the standard measure is housing should consume 30% or less of a household's income. So if a household's paying more than 30%, they're considered cost burdened and the housing isn't affordable. So while there's widespread agreement that we face a severe affordable housing crisis, there's very little agreement on what the solution should be. But the most popular solution is rent control, sometimes called rent stabilization. And under rent control, the government establishes the price that a landlord can charge for rental housing. And usually there's other provisions involved in rent control, but the really crucial part of it is they put a cap on what a landlord can legally charge. If he tries to charge more than that, he becomes a criminal. So it's a price cap, and if you know anything about price caps, they usually lead to a shortage. I'm going to focus my comments on rent control specifically, but it applies to all housing policy, the frameworks that I'm going to be discussing. Now, there's a joke that if you get 10 economists in a room and ask them to solve a problem or suggest a solution for a problem, you'll get 11 different answers. And I think there's some truth in that. But a few years ago, there was a survey of economists, and I think it was something like 85% of them agreed that rent control is bad, that it's ultimately harmful. There was a Swedish economist who once said that aside from bombing, rent control is the most effective way to destroy a city. And what happens under rent control is both the quality and the quantity of rental housing decreases. And it happens for a number of reasons, but think about it. If you're a landlord, and by the way, I am a landlord and have been for 15 years, so I do have personal experience with this. If you're a landlord and your profit is arbitrarily limited by government, are you going to be inclined to want to continue to invest in that? Probably not. If your profits are arbitrarily limited, you're not going to have the money for maintenance and upkeep or improvements. So just the price cap makes it difficult for the landlord to maintain his property. So the quality of the housing slowly degrades. Also, if, a lot of landlords remove their rental properties from the market because they can't get a good return on their investment. So they'll convert an apartment building to condominiums, or if it's a small building, maybe they'll move in with their family. But in either case, housing units are removed from the rental market. So the quantity decreases as well as the quality. So we have both theoretical and there are empirical studies many empirical studies that have seen this happen, where both the quality and the quantity decrease. So we have both empirical studies and theoretical theory that say rent control is not good. Yet, it continues to be advocated for. And just in the past few years, more than 200 communities have either enacted rent control laws, expanded the ones they have, or at least considered rent control. So the question is, even though we know that it's bad, that it's harmful, why does it continue to be such a popular proposed solution? It's not really a solution, but why does that continue to be brought up? My contention is it's the framework that's being used. There's a certain framework being used to analyze and evaluate housing policy, and it's leading to bad decisions. And this, I call it the progressive framework, because it came to prominence during the progressive era in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And it reflects the dominant philosophical ideas of that era. So it really has nothing to do with politics when I call it progressive framework. It's more of a method of how we analyze an issue or a problem. And this progressive framework dominates public policy discussion. And when I say dominate, I mean almost everybody embraces it. Political progressives do, Republicans do, conservatives do, Democrats do. It's across the board. So what is a framework? As I said, it's basically our method for analyzing. It's both a filter and a lens. As a filter, it determines what comes through to our awareness, what we're going to consider, what information are we going to evaluate. As a lens, it determines how we look at it. So there are three aspects to a framework. The first is our standard of value. What is it that we want to achieve? If we don't know where we're going, how will we know when we get there? And it's important that we pick the right standard of value. If we pick the wrong one, we might achieve it. We might achieve that goal that we set, but we find the results aren't what we want. So it's crucial that we are very clear and specific about what our standard of value is. And I hold that in regard to public policy, the proper standard of value is individual liberty. The freedom of each individual to live as he chooses, so long as he respects the mutual rights of others to do the same thing. So live and let live. This means that all human interaction should be voluntary, based on the mutual consent of everyone involved. So you can't stick a gun in your neighbor's face and make him do something you want. You can't tie him up. You can't break into his house and take his property. So everything has to be, all human interaction should be voluntary. And that should be our standard when we're evaluating public policy. Is this contributing or protecting individual liberty, or is it violating individual liberty? The second aspect of a framework is how we deal with the context. And by context, I'm talking about full context. The big picture, all of the related and relevant information, facts, issues. Because no issue arises in a vacuum. And whatever solution we come up with is going to impact other issues. So we have to consider all of that. And other issues may have an impact on the topic or issue that we're considering. And that's certainly true of housing. It's not easy to consider the full context. in my book, I'll hold that up. In my book, I address all this. And it's not always obvious what issues are related. For example, in my book, I talk about monetary policy and how that affects the affordability of housing. Now, that's probably fairly obvious to us, especially if you're trying to buy a house and you've seen what interest rates have done lately. Yeah, it's really affected the affordability of housing. But there's other policies that it's not so obvious how they impact housing, and one of them is highway policy. It's had a dramatic impact on housing. In fact, there's an issue going on here in Houston right now where they want to expand I-45, and they're going to do that, they have to destroy 1,000 affordable homes. And the whole interstate highway system, when it got to the cities, destroyed hundreds of thousands of homes. And this may or may not be surprising, but it was predominantly in minority neighborhoods because they didn't have the political clout to fight it, whereas the wealthier neighborhoods, and usually white, had the political clout to fight it. So the freeways got routed through these minority neighborhoods and homes were destroyed. So my point there is that highway policy isn't obviously related to housing policy, but if we want to address housing policy, then we have to look at the big picture and all of the related issues. And then the third part of a framework is considering alternatives and what's our attitude towards considering alternatives. If we dismiss certain alternatives out of hand without actually examining them, we might be missing one of the best solution. And when we examine alternatives, we want to look at the pros and cons of each. There's no policy that's going to be 100% perfect. But at the same time, there are some policies that are 100% wrong, but usually there's good and bad in these policies. There's benefits and harms. And so we have to honestly look at those and identify them. So what I've basically just described is a process of reason, looking at the facts, all of the relevant facts, and considering them. Now, I said the progressive framework is dominating housing policy, and not just housing policy, almost all public policy that is the progressive framework is being employed. So what's wrong with the progressive framework? Everything. Everything is wrong with it. It starts with the wrong standard of value. It starts with the group as the standard of value. And might be this group or that group, and the groups do vary. But it's always the group. And what it does is it pits one group against everyone else. Pits the members of that group against the non-members. And it's tribal warfare, where groups are competing to get some benefit at the expense of everyone else. Now, in regard to rent control, the group is renters. But it's not even all renters. It's a subset of renters. Because usually new construction is exempted from rent control. So if somebody lives in a new apartment building, they don't get the benefit. Single family housing is usually exempted. So they don't get the quote benefit. So there's just this small subset of renters who actually benefit from rent control. And that's the tribe that is promoting rent control, that tribe and its advocates. But the group is the standard of value, not the individual, but just the group, and the alleged well-being of the group. So they start with the wrong standard of value. In regard to context, they don't look at the big picture. They pick and choose, they cherry pick facts and look at them in isolation and say, look, rent control's good. And rent control does provide benefits to this small subset of renters. They get a good deal. They're getting rent, a cheaper rent than they would pay in a free market. So they're getting a good deal. It benefits them. but it harms almost everybody else. And studies have shown that when someone lives in a rent-controlled apartment, it's usually an apartment, they are much less likely to move because they got a good deal. And if they move, they might not be able to find a rent-controlled apartment. Plus, as I previously said, there's fewer rental units on the market because owners are pulling them off of the market. So it's harder if someone needs to move, if their housing needs change and they need to move or want to move, it becomes more difficult for them to find housing. And since the profits are being limited on the units under rent control, the prices of the other units rise. So if those who are getting an apartment on the free market or at market, what's called market rates, they're paying more. They're paying an elevated price. So they get harmed. If somebody moves into a city, they're going to find it difficult to find housing because people in rent-controlled housing don't want to move, and the prices are high on the others. And if the cities with rent control, this is borne out from studies. That's what happens. People move in, and it's unaffordable, and it's difficult to find a place to live. So when they're advocating for rent control, the advocates, ignore all this. They're just looking at this one immediate benefit, short-term benefit to a small group of people, and ignore the harm that it causes to everyone else, including the people who are benefiting now. Like I said, if their housing needs change, and they often do throughout our life, they're going to find it more difficult and more expensive to find new housing. So ultimately, it's harmful to them too. Not to mention the fact that if their landlord's not making a profit, he's not going to perhaps not maintain the housing as well as he would like or could have. So they wind up living in a slowly degrading housing unit. So it's harmful. It's harmful to everyone, even those who benefit immediately. And then finally, the progressive framework doesn't consider alternatives. For example, with the affordability of housing, they just look at, okay, we can make housing more affordable for this little group of renters by arbitrarily keeping prices down, the cost of rent down. But the housing crisis is essentially a supply shortage. There's not enough houses or apartments. There's not enough housing units. And rent control does nothing to change that. If anything, it does the opposite because people are taking properties off of the market. They don't have an incentive to build new units because they can't make a decent profit. But the rent control advocates don't look at it that way. They're just looking at this narrow benefit. Well, there are alternatives to rent control, and alternatives which recognize and are founded on individual liberty. There are a lot of regulations, and these are usually local regulations that dramatically drive up the cost of housing. And the broad category is land use regulations. And in my book, I give a couple of examples, Seattle and Austin, where these regulations add $140,000 to the cost of a new house. That's before you pour a foundation, buy a plot of land. How do you build affordable housing? Or housing that's affordable for low and moderate income households? You can't. It's $140,000 before you do anything else. And yeah, you could put up a tiny home, but it's still going to be expensive, a couple $100,000. And who wants to pay that for a 600 square foot house? Nobody. So they have to build these McMansions in order to make a profit. So again, and those certainly aren't affordable to low and moderate income households. So land use regulations play a big role in this, but there's one specific land use regulation which is by far the biggest culprit, by far. Single family zoning. Houston doesn't have zoning. doesn't have single-family zoning, but it does have a lot of land use regulations that do elevate the cost of housing. Certainly not as much as in cities like Austin or Seattle or San Francisco, but it plays a role. But it's estimated that 75% of the land in America's cities is zoned for single-family housing. And that means on a given parcel of land, you can build one house and only one house, nothing else. You can't put in a granny pad or a garage apartment, or you can't add any housing. And usually with zoning, there's a minimum lot size, and that varies widely, even within a city. But let's say the minimum lot size is 10,000 square feet. So you can only build one housing unit on that 10,000 square feet, which is an acre of land has about 44,000 square feet. So on an acre of land, you could build 4 houses. Well, what if you could put up other housing there instead of just a single family house or 4 single family houses? What if you could put in duplexes or small apartment buildings, 4 to 6 units, or townhomes, or any number of alternatives? Well, suddenly, with a little creativity on that acre of land, instead of 4 units, you might be able to do 8, 10, 12, 16 housing units. And now the cost of that land is divided between multiple units. So if a lot costs, say, $150,000, which isn't unusual in big cities, if that goes to one house, well, that right again, you've already elevated the cost of that house beyond the affordability of low and moderate income households. But if you could divide that $150,000 between, say, 10 housing units, wow, that's $15,000. Yeah, that impacts the cost of the housing, but far, far, far less. And now you might be able to build housing that's affordable for moderate and low income households. So single family zoning is by far the biggest culprit. And that's being recognized more and more. In fact, Joe Biden proposed withholding federal funds. 5 minutes? Okay. Withholding federal funds from any municipality that didn't repeal single family zoning. So it's being recognized. It hasn't had much of an impact, but some locations, some cities have repealed it. Berkeley, California, where single family zoning started, has repealed it. Minneapolis, Charlotte, and I'm not sure who else, now allow duplexes and triplexes on any property that used to be zoned for single family. So they're recognizing that if we want to address this problem, the affordable housing crisis, we need more housing. And we need it where people want to live. Yeah, sure, you can buy cheap land, out in Brazoria County, but if you're working in the medical center, you probably don't want to live out there. So getting rid of single family zoning would go a long, long ways towards rectifying this problem. Now, interestingly, conservatives are the biggest defenders of single family zoning, because they say if we get rid of it, then our neighborhoods are going to be filled with apartment complexes. And we all know that apartment complexes attract the wrong kind of people. So they're adamantly opposed to repealing single family zoning. And again, they embrace the progressive framework in defending single family zoning. They say it's going to ruin our neighborhood. So the neighborhood becomes the standard of value, the group. The neighborhood is the standard of value. So even they're using it to defend single family zoning. And they certainly avoid or ignore alternatives to single family zoning. And there are alternatives. One is deed restrictions, which if you are a homeowner, you probably live in a neighborhood with deed restrictions. They're popular in Houston because they do limit what you can do with your property, but it's a contractual agreement. You agree to that going in, instead of the city saying, this is it, take it or leave it. And well, you can do that with deed restrictions, but you can go to another community or neighborhood with deed restrictions more to your liking, or one without deed restrictions. So deed restrictions are an alternative to zoning. I mean, I don't want to live next to a muffler shop or something that's going to make a lot of noise, and deed restrictions can protect us from those types of things. But I used to live just down the street from an auto repair shop. My house was more affordable. And actually, it was nice to be able to take my car there, drop it off, and walk home. So there's, some people like that, some people don't. But deed restrictions can help protect a neighborhood. And there's also nuisance laws. Nuisance it's founded in common law, and it basically states that you have the right to the peaceful use of your property. So you have a house and a muffler shop opens next door and is making a whole lot of noise at all hours. Well, they've created a nuisance. And nuisance laws would address that. Now, what if he could have a muffler shop there and not make noise? Well, now he's not created a nuisance. I mean, he still may not want him there, but he hasn't created a nuisance. And that's entirely different. So there are alternatives to zoning where we can enjoy the peaceful use of our property and protect its values without the coercive and rights violating policies of zoning and single family zoning. So in summary, if we really want to solve the housing crisis, the affordable housing crisis, we have to reject the progressive framework and quit looking at the group, and it doesn't matter which group it is, and start looking at the individual. What will be beneficial? What policies benefit every individual? Male, female, black, white, gay, straight, and that's the standard is individual liberty. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for, is this on? Yeah. Thank you for discussing affordable housing. It really is important. In the medical field, just as an example, if you're going to advocate a particular approach to a problem, you really these days have to have evidence of benefit. So it isn't just based on a philosophy or something like that. So how do you feel about looking at communities around the world, societies around the world, and seeing what has actually worked rather than saying it has to comply with this notion of individual liberty and the individual trumps all, even the group? So what would you say about looking at communities around the world and seeing what has actually worked to provide affordable housing?
I've done that, and we can actually look out the window and see an example. I know housing prices in Houston have gone up a lot, but Houston has the most affordable housing of any major city in the country. And it's because of the lesser amount of land use regulations. Austin is insane. I mean, a middle-class family can't live in Austin. They certainly can't in Houston. And land use regulations, or the absence of them, or I can't say absence because Houston does have them, but the greatly reduced impact of land use regulations is evident in Houston. I mean, or look at New York or San Francisco or even Seattle. They have outrageous land use regulations, and the price of land just soars through the roof. And that, like I said, that has to be recovered through the cost of housing. So it drives up the cost of housing. Free up the land, and you'll drive down the cost of housing. And like I said, I think Houston is a prime example of that.
What's the break point when you increase the population density? There's been studies that show that when you increase population density, you get into problems. Cabrini Green in Chicago being one mighty awful example. So when you increase, go away to a pure single family to multiple and so on, what's the mix there so that you don't get in to a problem of degradation of quality of life with increase of population density?
Oh, I'm not sure I have an answer to that, but I don't think there's a magic density. It's at the beginning of the 1900s, American cities were much, much different because zoning hadn't come into vogue yet. And there was mixed use. They were much more dense than they are now. And when I say mixed use, there was business, there was residential, there were different kinds of housing, apartment buildings, single family, boarding homes. It was a mixture of all kinds of uses, land uses, all together, very densely. And I'm sure there are problems. Yeah, you get a bunch of people together, there are going to be problems. But I don't think there's some magic mix or magic number to aim for. But again, if we go back to our standard of value, individual liberty, let people act as they think is best for their lives. And if a community or a neighborhood starts getting too dense to where it starts degrading the quality of life, well, then they can move or do whatever they can to change that. But, okay, you're shaking your head.
Why should they have to move because of something imposed upon them by increased population density? Why should they bear the burden of that? Isn't there some, there's got to be, I lived also in Shaker Heights at one point. And in Shaker Heights, there was a mixed kind of thing. And it was a planned community. But there wasn't really low income in the Shaker Heights that started. So the question just comes back, where does, just roughly, I agree with you, there's no magic one number, but where's the sense of things as to when you increase population density, when does it start kind of going south?
There's not an answer to that. I don't know. It depends on what people do with their property and, a multitude of factors. But again, it comes back to individual liberty. Because the sense I'm getting from your question is that what should government do? Or what restrictions or controls should we impose? And that I totally reject. Let people decide for themselves what's best for their life. And that's my answer.
Quick question. You mentioned in Seattle $140,000 just to get started. Can you be specific? What costs $140,000?
Well, I can be more specific about Austin because that's more fresh in mind. They have, it's in my book, but like an environmental impact fee. So if you're putting concrete on a plot of land, you have to pay so much just for that concrete because it's creating runoff. If you build a house above a certain size, McMansion tax. I think there's some tax for protecting trees, and just a variety of regulations like this. And like I said, I've got them in the book. I've got them listed for Austin in here. But it adds an insane amount to the cost of housing. And government officials can be very creative in finding ways to get money. And this is one way they do it. You want to build a house or you want to do something? Well, yeah, we're going to charge you a whole bunch of money. If you don't pay it, you can't. We won't give you permission. And that's what's going on.
So this is going to be our final question.
Okay.
Oh, the pressure's on. So when I'm thinking about New York and Houston, as examples, Houston certainly is yes, we're urban. Houston is a large city. However, we also have a lot lower density of individuals. We still have a lot of greenfield development that's possible, quite a bit of brownfield development as well. Whereas in New York, I think the density looks very, very different. And so I'm really kind of curious how you would see a policy like this actually being possible in a traditionally very dense, very old, established urban center like New York.
Well, some of it might play out as just repurposing a plot of land. Maybe today it holds a 3-story brownstone or something. Tear it down and build a 20-foot apartment building or 50-foot apartment building. Or if you're Donald Trump, 1,000-foot apartment building. But again, it goes back to individual liberty. People will, if the demand for housing in New York goes up and people are free to use their land as they choose, then they'll find creative ways and innovative ways to satisfy that demand by reusing their property. Or, there's a lot of office space in New York and most major cities now that's not being used because people are working remotely. Well, maybe those could be converted to housing. I know there's a lot of difficulties in doing that, but that's a possibility. And the property owner will have to decide, is it worth the expense to do that or just leave it vacant and make no money? So I leave it up to human ingenuity and human freedom. And when people are free, they will find creative solutions to problems. And thanks. Can I mention that this is for sale? Yes. Okay. I do have copies of my book for sale. They're $20, and I won't charge anything to sign it for you.
So right now we have our community moment featuring our own Wil Jeudy, Paige Williams, and David Oliverio.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody. The singer, where is she? I just missed her. I love that song about love, by the way. We need more of that. That was great. Yeah, we wanted to share. I came up with this idea, and I shared it with Will a few weeks ago and with Paige, of our experience at the Interfaith conference. And we had a great time. And we wanted to share what happened with this interfaith adventure that we had back in December. And I got my notes here. So we went to Wheeler Avenue Baptist Church. Yeah, I got that right, a Baptist church. And I got some good news for you today. Not all Baptists are Southern Baptists. We learned a lot. We had a great time. We met some wonderful people. We went to the Democracy, Faith, and the Rise of Christian Nationalism lunch and lecture. It was a really good lunch, too. Any place, time there's food, I'm real happy. It was good. And Will has been doing a wonderful job. By the way, hats off to Will. His collaboration, yes, give him a hand. His collaboration with the Interfaith Ministries. And he does wonderful work. He asked Paige and I to help him out. So we went. Will picked me up. Paige took me home. We had a good time. And we walked in. So Will went at the other end of the building. I stayed on this side of the building. And we mingled with people. And Paige came a few minutes later. And I was looking for a place to sit down for lunch because they had the round tables like we do here for our potlucks. And I was going to try to find a place where I could sit and just get to know some of these wonderful people. And guess what? I stumbled across a table with 4 clergy members. And that's great, right? These are very progressive and liberal believers who we can collaborate with. And you will hear this in a moment from the other 2 as well. And how did I know they were clergy members? Well, they had their collars, big giant Jesus crosses on, and their hands were folded in prayer, and they were praying over their lunch. So when they were finished, I walked up and said, "May I sit down?" They said, "Yes." We had a wonderful talk. Great people. Paige showed up. She sat down right next to me. Everybody there knows Paige. She's like a movie star there. Half the people knew Paige there. And so we had a wonderful conversation. Now, here's the real good stuff. The keynote speaker, Will has been dealing with her, was Amanda Tyler out of Dallas, the executive director. Now, all of you standing back there, make sure hold on to something because I don't want you passing out. But this is great news. The executive director of the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty and Freedom. And I mean liberty and freedom for all. They were very kind to us. They knew we were secular, right? The people at our table, we told them we were from Oasis. They knew that. Amanda talked about church-state separation. Good news, right? Just like the Founding Fathers said, both religion and government will exist in greater purity. The less we're mixed together, they know that. They believe in the removal of In God We Trust in public schools. They're pro-public schools, pro-science, just like us. Freedom for all. She, Amanda Tyler, has worked and collaborated with Annie Laurie Gaylor. Anybody heard of Annie Laurie Gaylor, right? And Dan Barker, the Freedom from Religion Foundation in Madison, Wisconsin. Now, I close with this. I'm going to turn it over to Paige. Will had a lunch meeting with myself and Kim Mabry, the program manager for the Interfaith Ministry of Greater Houston. We met at Whole Foods over there in the Inner Loop, close to where Christine and I live. And we met for lunch there. We had a great conversation with her. She asked Will how we could collaborate with her and the Interfaith Ministries of all these wonderful believers, right? And here's the interesting thing. She said, you know what? I'm learning something. I've studied the principles of humanism, and I talked to one of my good friends who's secular, and after listening to you guys talk, it seems to me like the principles of humanism are very, very similar to the principles of Jesus that we teach at our very, very progressive church. And that was very good to hear, right? Now, back in my angry atheist years, I would have said, you're cherry picking, you know? And now I'm like, thank you very much. You keep picking, give me a big hug. So it was a wonderful experience. I learned a lot. We have a lot of good collaborators to work with. These are fine people. I'm going to turn it over to the very famous Paige.
Well, I'm the commercial intermission. I'm just speaking to you that I've been going to Interfaith Ministries things since long before I was coming to Oasis. I mean, it's basically like a humanist group of people who don't try to shove their beliefs down anybody else's throat. And I used to, before I moved to an apartment, I hosted some dinner dialogues at my home because it was important to me to be able to say that Muslims were welcome in my home. That was during the time when everybody hated Muslims. Now they changed to Chinese with the pandemic. So I've sat next to people that I say I'm a non-theist. The man next to me says I'm a heathen, and his wife next to him says I'm a Wiccan priestess, and we're all welcome. So I really believe in what their message is.
Thank you, Paige. For those of you that don't know or do know, I'm kind of more the activist energy in Oasis. Oasis is not an activist group, but I formed a side group called Secular Houston. One of the main things we do is push back against Christian nationalism and try to advance non-belief in the real world. Two important parts of that are changing hearts and minds, and in my opinion, having a voice in local politics. So that's what we do in Secular Houston. Along the way, I learned, I forget exactly how I stumbled into the interfaith world, but I did. And I was like David, I quickly, as an atheist, as a non-believer, I never went through an angry phase, but I just like, what do they have to offer? They believe in Jesus, and we're trying to push back against Christian nationalism. So I kind of had a little bit of tunnel vision. But as I met, this is more national groups, the Interfaith Alliance, Americans United for Separation of Church and State. and Baptist Joint Commission, and their subgroup Christians Against Christian Nationalism. So I started meeting their leadership at the national level. Holy crap! I mean, they are wonderful. I was blown away at how hard they are pushing back against Christian nationalism, and the fact that they've been doing it for decades, and they do it well. Everything I was doing, thinking about doing, learning what to do in the atheist, in the non-belief world, they're doing it 5 times better and with 5 times as much energy. It's a real deal. I was absolutely blown away. So quickly, again, I was a little bit dismissive of them, but not anymore. I started meeting more and more, not only groups, but individuals on boards on panels with people. Absolutely amazed. So I am a huge interfaith believer now. So I brought that kind of back to Houston, started meeting more interfaith people here. UU churches have a lot of social justice energy and activism energy. Interfaith Ministries, again, we had lunch with the leadership. To a person, to an org, they love the fact that we want to be at the table, locking arms with them, pushing back against Christian nationalism. Again, welcome with open arms, with love, and as equals. And it was almost like, where have you all been? Like, this is wonderful. Some of the national orgs, they do have some, they are represented. We do have atheist, agnostic, non-believer representation up there. But locally, it is, David and I are kind of heading a team to meet more and more of these interfaith people and sit at the table and be on the planning for pushing back against Christian nationalism, being a part of this interfaith coalition, this tapestry that includes all kinds of different people and religions. So just want to let you know we have a lot of stuff planned this year. A big event that we hope, there's going to be a big movie coming out against Christian nationalism called God and Country, produced by Rob Reiner. It comes out next month, but I want to have a big interfaith event around that where people like us show up to watch the movie, they show up to watch the movie, you go somewhere afterwards and discuss it and figure out what can we do about this. This is all in the spirit, no pun intended, of interfaith. So that's been kind of our adventure. So stay tuned, talk to us, and we'll hopefully we can update you a little bit later this year. But interfaith is where it's at, y'all. Thank you.
All right. Right before our next song, we're going to do one more thing real quick. We want to introduce the board of Houston Oasis. So all board members, would you come up here and stand in a line, a chorus line, if you will? All the ones in the room, everybody that's here. All right, so this is part of your board for the next couple of years. There's Jacob, and I can't see people, and Tim, and Verena, and Will, and Richard, and David, and me, and who's outside? But we had a very, Jennifer, where's Jennifer? Oh, she went back outside. Jennifer and Pete, and David, Jennifer, Verena, Richard, and Tim are new board members. Although they're not new to the community, we're very excited to have them. We had a very wonderful, thought-provoking, and interesting day yesterday. And our goal is going to be to become more transparent and share with you all of the information and all of our ideas. There's Jennifer. Sorry. But to share with you more, and we will have an upcoming town hall meeting. Don't get PTSD from that. Just we're going to have a meeting in March sometime, and we'll let you know about that. But we really want to have more transparency. So if you need to talk to anybody, feel free. These are your board members, and we're here to make a positive step forward coming out of the pandemic and into this new time, 2024. We really think that there's a lot that's going to happen in our community going forward. So thank you all very much. Just to give a few more little announcements, we are having lunch at Chapultepec, Lupita, on Richmond. It is in the bulletin. please feel free to come and continue the conversation that we've started today at lunch. It's always so much fun. Next week, we are going to have David Oliverio, who you met today, to talk to us about balancing reason and emotion. And Chelsea Beach will be our musical performer. Just for one moment, we learned a lot yesterday in the meeting and that we had, and that I'd like to just say that if you have the ability to donate anything to this organization, we would really appreciate it. And if you don't, that's fine. But the Montrose Center is running a little bit more than we had done at Baker Ripley, but certainly is worth it. I believe the central location and the ease of getting here, and I think it's definitely worth it. So if you can, please donate. There on the back, there's QR codes, there's a hat, there's everything. Please feel free to add to it. I would like to thank all of our performers today. Brian, thank you very much for coming and sharing that. Will and Paige and David, thank you for the work you're doing with the Interfaith Ministries. I think that's very important that we become well seen and well identified in the Houston community. So with that, yes, Richard. Oh yeah, and next week is a potluck, which means bring food, bring your own lunch, bring things, but don't bring clam pizza. Whatever you do, no clam pizza. Okay, Richard. Oh, everybody, if you brought something that's not finger food, bring a serving utensil. That'd be great. That is true, though, because little plastic things make it really difficult. Thank you all for being here today, and I hope each and every one of you has a wonderful week, and we'll look forward to seeing you next Sunday and enjoying all the events. And thank you, Ted, for putting all the contact information in here so people who want to participate can get a hold of the folks that are doing the organizing. All right, thank you very much.
Whenever I'm alone with you, you make me feel like I am home again. Whenever I'm alone with you, you make me feel like I am whole again. Whenever I'm alone with you, well, you make me feel like I am young again. Whenever I'm alone with you, yeah, you make me feel like I am fun again. And however far away, I will always love you. However long I stay, I will always love you. And whatever words I say, I will always love you. I will always love you. Whenever I'm alone with you, yeah, you make me feel like I am free again. Whenever I'm alone with you, yeah, you make me feel like I am clean again. And however far away, I will always love you. However long I stay, I will always love you. And whatever words I say, I will always love you. I will always love you. And however far away, I will always love you. However long I stay, I will always love you. And whatever words I say, I will always love you. However far away, I will always love you. However long I stay, I will always love you. And whatever words I say, I will always love you. I will always love you. Whenever I'm alone with you, well, you make me feel like I am home.